Ableton comes stacked with a load of high quality presets that many people don't realize. Not to mention there are a bunch of other packs that you can download that aren't included in the core library. But some are a little more special than others. So today I want to cover 12 of my favorite preset effects, as well as a few MIDI effects and instruments that I'll throw in the mix that will all add instant flair to your music. Now, if you do want to dive more into the inner workings of Ableton, check out our free Ableton Workflow Bible written by the amazing Connor, whether it's the basic workflow or all the effects you need to know. This thing has you covered for every aspect of Ableton. Grab that in the description and let's hop in. Now we'll start off with effects, and the first one I want to let you know about is this phaser flanger preset called Double Ether. Now I've just got some keys here and I'll let you listen to them without Double Ether on. They sound okay. Now, doubler ether makes use of a new doubler effect that's included in the phaser flanger device, and it sounds like this. Instant thickness and wobble to the sound. Now, this is great on chords. You can use it on like a lead melody. It just gives this characteristic to a sound, which helps it to really stand out in the mix and gives it a little bit of stereo image and warmth, right? I love to play around with both the amount of this effect, as well as the actual time here makes it thicker and more of a kind of delay between the two signals. Let's crank this up. Now this is a bit too much, so generally under about 70 milliseconds works quite well. Now, if I bring the amount down, because the amount with a high time tends to sound a bit too intense as well. So I'm gonna bring that right down. That one's quite like lo-fi sounding while it's still having that nice doubled stereo image. And the dry wet, of course, to give it a nice kind of balanced effect depending on what you're going for. Okay, so number 2 is this nice twisted riser effect inside shifter device, which is a expansion of the frequency shifter that used to be in Ableton Live 10. I've got some white noise here, which is a perfect bass signal to apply this effect on. Because what it does is add this like glitchy pitched, almost kind of like a shepherd tone effect where it just sounds like it's always increasing in pitch. Now you can use this on all sorts of effects. If I dragged in, say, some birds chirping, I could use it on this. Basically turns anything into a really interesting digital kind of sounding riser effect. Now, it comes with the dry wet 100% up by default, I believe. I like to sometimes blend some of the wet signal in depending on what I'm going for. And you can actually play around with some of the phase effects depending on how like stereo you want the effect, as well as some of this feedback and stuff like that to get more of the pitch going back in, etc. How intense you want the effect to be, you can dial it down. And of course, you can combine this with the actual increase in fine pitch or coarse pitch to get even more of a riser effect too. You get some really twisted results. Lastly, you can also dial the effect back a bit on the LFO by making it not as much of an amount, so the semitone amount won't be as intense if you want more of a subtle kind of wobble effect. I'd probably use that more for like a vibrato type thing rather than this kind of application, but hey, you can go nuts and do whatever you want. Another awesome shifter preset is the phasing preset. I've just got a bass loaded up here. So if we switch this on, you'll hear it kind of adds this very slow wobble to the sound, which is perfect for just adding motion to bass sounds, to pads alike. And particularly with bass sounds, I love to play around with the spread effect, just because you'll notice with the dry wet at 50%, it creates this really awesome like squelch when you move it up or down. And same if you move it down the opposite direction. Slightly different inverse effect there, right? And this is great, especially if you want to go ahead and do more post-processing and stuff like that to bass sounds. But again, it's also just great for adding a subtle movement to like pads, leads, and other sounds that just sound a bit static. It's similar to a phaser, but it uses frequency shifting rather than a phaser effect to achieve this kind of sound. So it's a little different. Number 4 is this Intercom Speaker effect, which is actually included in the new hybrid reverb special section. So you'll find it here. Basically what this has done is at 100% wet, it's captured the sound of an intercom speaker and can apply that characteristic to any sound. So I've just recorded some really cheesy vocals here, which just obviously, yeah, let's just listen to them. I just don't know where you've been my whole life. I looked for you. It took me so long. Sounds like something out of a movie or something. I was just kind of going for that vibe. Perfect for like a lo-fi tune, right? Except it doesn't sound very lo-fi. So the intercom speaker, just load up the preset, simple as that.
I just don't know where you've been my whole life. I looked for you. It took me so long.
Instant awesome lo-fi results, right? And it doesn't just sound like an EQ to sound really weird. It actually sounds like it's in that space and it was recorded out of an intercom speaker, which is perfect. A little extra hint is also use the vintage boombox preset if you want it to sound even more like lo-fi and gritty, because it uses this nice vintage extreme setting, making it really like down-sampled and gritty.
I just don't know where you've been my whole life. I looked for you.
Perfect for instant lo-fi sounds. So number 5 is the Dripping Grains preset, which is actually a preset of the Spectral Resonator, which is one of my favorite new Ableton live devices that was introduced. I think it was in 11. Basically, I've just got a nice kind of pad loaded up here, a string pad. Kinda FM-y, but still analog sounding. If we load up this preset, now by default, it doesn't sound too fantastic, but it's really the power behind this preset that I love. We'll start to crank up the dry wet to 100%. It's kind of very atonal and random. What we want to do is actually switch on the MIDI sync and have the input come from the same MIDI that we're playing the chords with. So you can just set that to the Dripping Grains like on the same channel. Now you'll notice it's kind of in the same key at least. If we bring this stretch control back, it won't stretch the pitch completely. We don't want to bring it back to 0 though, because we want to give it a bit of pitch instability, and having about 1.6 to 2% there either direction will do that. You can start to hear that when you bring back the wet. I like to bring the harmonics down to give it more of a subtle kind of like deeper effect, I guess. And it almost writes melodies for you. You'll see what I mean. Now I can go ahead and add reverb to this. Blend a bit of the wet signal in if I want. Bring the input up. And then lastly, set it to poly on the input here to make it really get each of those notes in the chord in. Oof. Play around with the shift to shift the spectrum input, which will give it either a brighter or duller tone. It almost feels like you're strumming the effect at this point, really. Great for just sparkly ambient moments or breakdowns or just a background layer to really add texture to your song. I've been using this a lot. Okay, so only the good parts is a classic auto filter preset, which basically, by default, again, it doesn't sound like it's doing too much. I've got a vocal here. And when I switch it on, it just sounds a little driven. But what happens is you bring the filter cutoff down and the envelope that's applied on this preset starts to move the filter down at the quieter parts, giving it this muffled, motiony kind of effect. I actually have heard this effect or something similar be used on a Mallgrab remix of a Clo track, which is probably one of his biggest tracks, if you know who Mallgrab is. It's kind of the same sort of effect in that song. And it uses the envelope to move with the vocal sound, giving it like this organic texture. I actually love to crank the resonance a bit, bring down the drive. You can play around with the different filter types, depending on the character of which one you like, but the MS2 is pretty good. Again, you can add additional post-processing to this sound after to kind of give it more of an effect. Simple but effective in a lot of cases. For number 7 here, we're going to dive into the classic OTT preset. Now, if you haven't heard of OTT, I'd encourage you to check out our full OTT tutorial I did a few years back on this channel. Now, I've got a little bass sound here in Ableton's wavetable. Sounds nice and gritty, but we can really bring the life and character out of the sound by just absolutely slamming the living daylights out of it with OTT. Watch what happens when I enable this preset. Instant control and tone in the high end. It sounds incredible. Now, it's a bit too much, hence the name OTT, so we can actually just bring the amount down and blend it to taste. And thanks to my friend Zach, who actually works with Hyperbits, he actually recommended the OTT no highs or no treble preset version, where you actually can save a version of OTT, where you can click this little save button in the corner here, where you have the highs on, so they're still passing through the plugin, but they're not being compressed. And this preserves the high end if you don't like the squashed effect on the highs, you want to keep it more natural. This can work for certain bass sounds and other applications too. This works well on leads, basses, even sometimes vocals and drums too. But I also wanted to mention in the same sweep that the Multiband Compression preset, which is yet again another version of a multiband dynamics preset just here, OTT one's down there, which is a bit more subtle, but still provides that clarity that you may want out of a sound. Versus with it off. The highs just are a little more present. You can drive them a bit more as well if you want to. And control the output. And use that in a more natural way, because this one doesn't brutalize the sound as much. So that's another solid option too. Again, applicable on pretty much any sound as long as you're using it in the right amount. Now back to our double ether one, we're actually going to go and use the same example to demonstrate another effect called Harmonic Sweeper, which is actually a grain delay preset, which just adds this nice harmonic effect to anything. So without it, again, it sounds like this at this point. And I'm going to enable this Harmonic Sweeper effect, and it really changes the sound quite a lot. So by default, it's probably a bit too much again, but bringing back the dry wet. Basically what it's doing is it's adding 7 semitone intervals to the sound, creating this really nice harmonic series-esque type effect. Sounds really cool in certain instances. You may need to, again, play around with the dry wet as well as the frequency here, just to rhythmically align it with the sound. Tends to work better on leads than chords as well. Just because the clarity of the harmonic effect is important with this particular preset. So maybe try using it on individual notes rather than chords like I just did. Okay, number 9, we're actually going to jump into MIDI presets now. The MIDI effects are over on the side here. I'm actually got this little old school E-piano loaded up. Just doing the 2 notes there for now. And I'm using the chord device Eternal Sunshine preset. Now, I'm not sure if this is inspired by the compositional tone and texture of the Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind theme song. The preset does remind me of that a bit, but notice what happens and how much this comes to life once I turn it on. Instant chord progression, right? I'm just going F, B flat for those who want to know. And it's adding these harmonic intervals to any incoming note that I want with particular velocity levels, giving it this human feel. You know, for example, the 7 semitones down from the root note I'm playing is a lot quieter, giving it this subtle subharmonic effect, which I really love. And then you've got an octave effect down below, which reinforces and makes it sound very thick. So I love this preset. Really nice. I will mention a few of the other ones here. The major 7 chord is pretty good, but Eternal Sunshine, if I had to mention one, is my favorite just because I love the sound of it. Another MIDI effect I love to use is Add Some Random. This is using the Velocity device. It's one of the first presets. I've got this banjo sound here with a little bit of post-processing on just to make it sound professional. But it sounds very static, right? Now, not only would I change the timing if I wanted to make this sound like a real banjo, even though it is a synthesized one, one thing I can do to make it to sound unique and organic is this Add Some Random, which is going to impact the velocity going into the synth of my choice. At the moment, if we look at the MIDI, all the notes are static down the bottom here. We can see that they're all hitting around that 98 mark. Once I chuck this on, you'll notice this random knob here is set to 30, which basically means it's going to create a 30, I think technically 15 velocity points, let's say, up or down below the baseline level of velocity that you got. So it's going to each time choose a random value in that range and send that to the synth of your choice. So let's listen to what this effect sounds like when it's on. It's going to crank this up even more so you can hear the effect of it. So you can hear the randomness start to come in the sound there and make it sound a little more organic and not static. We can control the exact range of velocities we want with these out, high, and low as well, which is pretty cool if we want to make it more subtle overall or more intense. Say we wanted to sound like a banjo player, just like lightly tapping on the notes. We can do that with these two effects. This works on absolutely anything you're using MIDI for, whether it's a synth, instrument, or whatever. Great to add organic texture to a sound. Lastly, I just wanted to mention two of my favorite instrument presets in Ableton Live. First is this second stellar strings, which is actually an instrument rack preset. But if you dive into the device view, you'll see it's mostly a wavetable with some reverb. Now, I absolutely love the sound of these strings. They're very synthesized sounding, but they sound very organic in their own unique way. Just got a nice little progression here. I'm gonna play for you to just show you the power of this preset. It's just amazing, very epic sounding, great for cinematic moments. I love to play around with the filter frequency. Mess around with the sub gain to make it a little less muddy, as well as the lower octave. You can make it more of a slow attack to make it even more cinematic. And then the unison and reverb to thicken it up and give it more space. The unison's particularly fun to modulate as you're like creating builds and stuff because it opens the sound up really nicely. So you could go ahead, show automation and like build that up over time. And then lastly, another wavetable preset I just wanted to mention, which I really discovered the other day and have absolutely been loving just due to its nice harmonic nature, is this glowing filaments preset. Now this is a nice kind of plucky key sound, but it's got this one oscillator with 7 semitones up and then one at the root note there. And it just is like a very analog, very rich sounding synth. I've got this little arpeggiated pattern I programmed in. There's nothing really to tweak on this. I mean, you can play around with stuff like filter, add post-processing to taste, but it just sounds really nice. You don't have to use something as crazy as the pattern I put in there. This is the perfect kind of thing that you could just add a nice counter melody over the top of your track, create a bit of space, background effect, or you could use it as a lead in and of itself. It's a really nice analog sounding synth that I recommend you play around with. And that is 12 of my favorite Ableton presets, from effects to MIDI effects to instruments. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you're feeling a little more inspired to dive into Ableton's presets to see what they're capable of. Again, if you want to dive a bit more into the world of Ableton, make sure to grab the free Ableton Workflow Bible down below in the description right now. I will see you whenever you decide to next watch a video from us. Thanks for sticking around. Bye.